Right, here's the lever cleaned up. I replaced the rubber buffer pad on that because it was gone. See if we can get this screwed in place. I'm just not picking up the holes in that advanced lever for some reason. Now we're in business. Okay, so press the release lever. Frame counter, reset that. You press the release lever. Film advanced lever moves smoothly, and you can see the gear works at the top of the camera. So that part's good. The return action is good. That's positive. That works very well. Just looking at the gear, the teeth here, make sure that they're not overly tight, that there's sufficient backlash there and no more. Tighten up those two screws. Well, I could put the cocking rack in place next, I suppose. I'll need to put the top trim plate on. It's been cleaned, that's ready to go. And let's hold that down with the strap lug from the other end of the camera so that it doesn't run away. While I'm here, I might just as well put the rewind back together and get that in place. Put some grease on the inside of the bush. And of course there's the spring, the wire, that little wire loop which holds this all together. I can stretch. That's much easier to get it back in place than it was to take it off. The rewind goes on there. Two screws. There's a little bit of pitting where that corrosion was around the chrome trim at the top. Just visible here, but it's not too bad. This post can go in. That's the post that supports the top cover at that end of the camera. And where's the cocking rack? There's a support bush that goes there, supports the rack. The rack I'm lubricating with some synthetic grease. Taking care to the underside of that there. That drops in there. I want one tooth engagement there is typically correct. The hold down bracket here, got a little roller on it, and that of course is dry because it's been through the cleaner and all its lubricants were gone. But there you go, I just put a smear of grease on there and forced it in. 2 screws. And for here I want a slightly shorter one than was fitted because I don't want to have the screw sticking through into the transfer shaft. This one will do the job. And the strap plug at this end. Countersunk head screw here. And the one that goes through the little bush has a shoulder on it to support that bush. And I'll just put a wipe of molybdenum paste on there. Now, all going well, the wrap should move smoothly. Certainly appears to be okay. If you have the engagement incorrect here, you'll find that it might run up against the casting at the end and it'd be impossible for you to complete the advanced stroke. But that appears to be correctly placed. So that part's good. Just checking the action of the release here, the film release. It seems a little bit stiff to me. Yeah, there's something not quite right there. I think that's just not moving smoothly. I'm just looking to make sure that that spring looks good. Okay, I've got that film release moving nice and smoothly now. It just needed a touch of molybdenum paste on the tip of the lever where it joins the cam on the base of the film advance. That's all working nice and smoothly, and really that's as far as I can take the body at this stage. I could put the spring back here, I could put the mirror in there, but I can't put the meter cord and so forth back in place until I've got the adjustment for our shutter release and film release correct. Of course, I'd had to take this apart because it was smothered in lacquer, and there's sort of no guarantee it was correctly timed anyway. So I will have to work on the front of the camera, get that clean, stripped, get the shutter serviced. We can fit the front of the camera back to this, get the shutter working correctly, sort out the adjustment for the release, take the front back off the camera, put the meter cord and so forth back into it, and put the front back on again. Easy. Here's the entire front section from our Retina Reflex 3, and this needs to be stripped down. I've got the cam here which cocks the shutter, This is not the one from the camera, that's actually been cleaned and is waiting for it to be put back. So I've cocked that, released the shutter. You see the blade's closed, but they're exceptionally sluggish at closing. At that stage the mirror comes up, the capping plate comes up, hits this tab here, which releases the action of this rack, and with a bit of luck we can get this thing to run down. There we go. So it's pretty sluggish to go down. It's sluggish to close to ready to fire, and it's sluggish when it's running. So it certainly needs to be serviced, there's no question about that. The same hand that put the lacquer all over the spring in the body also blobbed up plenty of it here and here. That's okay, we can deal with that. I'll start removing some of this stuff. So I'm going to remove the shutter release here from the back, so I'll start with the spring. Should be able to unhook this. Yeah. We can see a little bit of corrosion here on the front. That might make for a rough patch, so we've got to have a look at that. Our flash connection here is soldered, and then that's been covered with some black paint or lacquer to blacken that up. So I've got to unsolder that connection, and then we can lift that off. Okay, that's out the way. Let's start taking some of this stuff off the back of the shutter. This is the buffer pad, such as it is, that the mirror comes up against. And it's a little strip of leather. Take that plate off the top. Get 2 washers. This little internal rack that operates the shutter. Remove that small pinion. That's actually the shaft that cocks the shutter itself. Up here we have, I'll uncover that so you can see it. It's usual for that screw to be very tight. So I chose a bigger screwdriver and used lots and lots of downward pressure to make sure it didn't slip. Remove that shoulder screw. This arm may lift out without any argument. Not today, the little plastic insulator is catching on that bracket. Push that bracket across a bit, it might clear. Yeah, it does. Here we have a little wheel, complete with a bush in the centre. And that was in the correct way. One side of that wheel has the teeth relieved back from the full width, and that side should face forward, otherwise the edge of the teeth could rub on the inside of this arm. That's it. Remove this screw. This little spring bracket holds down the wheel on there. We've got a little pinion here. Now there's a little washer on there, a shim that you probably, yeah, just about see that. This little piece here is engaged when the shutter's cocked, and as it swings round it engages this pin, which is actually on the blade actuating ring, and as the shutter's cocked, this arm picks up that pin and swings it across, opening the blades for viewing. And of course when the action reverses, when you release the shutter, it swings back, allowing that to close. Right, so that piece can come out, and that has a shim washer under it too. These are very, very thin shim washers. And that's not wanting to come off when I ask it politely. No, I'll deal with that later, it's just not playing the game. 4 screws hold the shutter housing here to the front plate. 2 down in holes here at the bottom part of the shutter. You can't see what you're doing there, so you have to work by feel. 2 at the top where you can see them. The screws are fairly easily damaged. I usually make a point of putting the 2 best examples down in those holes there where you can't see, where you're reliant on touch. And the ones that you can see, they can be ugly, you can see what you're doing with your screwdriver, which makes it possible to deal with them if the head's a bit damaged. Okay, so with that done, I'll push that flash contact. Now that's bent right over, someone's been a bit enthusiastic there. I'm going to have to clear some of that blob of solder off there. That's never going to pass through this washer, that insulating washer with that great blob on there. So back shortly. Right, I've got that apart. Not entirely without casualty. This plastic insulator here on the flash contact, I noticed that's split. I'm not sure whether that's was ever continuous, to tell the truth. There's a bit of a colour mismatch between those 2 plastics, so someone's put a piece of sleeve on here previously, and I dare say we'll be putting another piece of sleeving on there to replace it. That's alright, that's what heat shrink tubing is for. So here's our shutter free from the front housing, and the front housing itself, I can see that the cover here is a bit mutilated. Now I don't know what's happened there. That's where the flash contact pokes through. Now somebody's obviously poked and prodded at that with something. I'll just make sure that that slot is clear where that contact has to go through. There's certainly something odd going on there. But apart from that, I've just got to clean this. Now I've just noticed a dirty patch of crud right here. Not sure what that is. Might be hamburger. Anyway, that'd be for cleaning. This is an insulating washer that just goes around that flash contact. We'll get that done. And here's the shutter itself. The flash contact is a little bit vulnerable at the back there. It sticks out. It tends to get folded backwards and forwards. You try and do it as few times as possible, otherwise you'll snap the thing off. Right, so we've got 3 screws holding the front settings rings in place. Alright, I'll split those from the shutter. And yes, they were correctly aligned. That was all good. This is a bit stiff. It's a bit sticky. There's a bit of dust and dirt in there. Looks like dried grease there. These components are always a bit of a nuisance. They do affect the way the settings work if they're too stiff and sticky. This has been lubricated with a bit of graphite by the looks of it. Now here, that even grey surface there, that's some surface that's been put on there. Typically that's just plain aluminium. That's some low friction surface that's been applied. So when I clean all this with naphtha, I probably won't need to put anything on there and it should work nicely. Shutters, they often changed the way they did things. You saw new things come in and disappear again as they either proved not as useful as they'd hoped or too expensive to make or something of that nature. I'll put those pieces to one side with 3 screws for the front cover. Here we've got the shaft that connects this little pinion, which connects to the control rings here, through to the meter cord in the camera. And this little eyelid can come off. And that's all we need off the front. This little half shaft here that sticks up high, that's a nuisance. It stops this from sitting down flat on my table. If I can drop that into a hole on here, yeah, I can fit that up on my block of wood. That'll sit nicely now, without argument. We should have 3 screws hold this in place. One of them is pretty much tucked under this settings lever, so if I hold this back and swing the settings lever to the X position, I think that should be fine. And one here. I'm well supplied with plastic containers to put loose screws and things in, because that's what the cotton buds or Q-tips come in. Okay, so here, this is a bit interesting. There's some lacquer being put on here. Now, somebody must have been raiding their wife's cosmetics there, because that's neither red nor clear nor black. It's some sort of pinky colour. That's an odd thing to do. Normally you don't disturb the position of those 2 screws, so I'm not sure why someone needed to muck around with that. So here's their front cover. What have we got here? We've got the ball that serves as the detent for the shutter speed settings. The cover plate for the front of the shutter. And a little pinion here. Little idler. Now that just That's quite stiff there. That would have had some bearing on the slowness of the shutter blades to close. When you first fired the shutter, the blades were very slow to come in and close. That would have had some bearing on that. That's unusually stiff. And here we have the shutter itself. I'll just see if this cocks and fires nicely. I've got a tool here with a D-shaped socket. Actually, it came off the shutter release for a Retinette, I think. Just cock that, set the shutter speed to a second. I'm keen to see how well this runs. Yeah, that was a bit sluggish, but it's a better performance than we'd seen previously. So the shutter was not the shutter itself was not the prime problem with the shutter. The problems were with the mechanism behind the shutter, and certainly with that little pinion and its reluctance to move smoothly. Okay, well, I can start disassembling this now. So here I've got a front plate. I think this one was taken from a Reflex S. It's been gutted so that it's got nothing on the back of it to speak of. Makes a marvellous platform for dealing with the shutter while I'm taking it apart and when I'm reassembling it. So the front retaining ring, I'll swing that round to where I can get my tweezers into it. I just want to lift up one side of it. And then take the retaining ring off. The shutter speeds settings cam plate can come off. This little latch can come out. That holds the shutter in the cocked position. This internal cam can come out. That all looks good. This pinion, the cocking pinion that runs right through from the back of the shutter, that can come out. Now the main spring here is sitting oddly. It looks to me that that's probably quite strong. We'll have a look and see if I'm right. Yes, that is. Normally these springs are quite tired. This one's in very good condition. That's the orientation I would expect for a brand new spring to sit at. So that's a very good thing to find. Normally they're stressed. They just die of old age. Basically things like this, they were the cutting edge of technology at one stage, and like sports cars and other such things, stuff was pushed to the limits and beyond. And that's exactly what happened with things like this spring. They were expecting too much from an undernourished spring, and basically it was overstressed, and the metal tends to relax and doesn't have the tension it should have. So leaving shutters in the cocked position for a long time, of course with old cameras they could have been left in the cocked position for decades. Those springs lose their tension. So I'll remove the screws from the retard gear train. And a single screw holds in the self timer. Those speed trains, I'll clean them in the ultrasonic cleaner and some naphtha. The shutter, let's just cock this part. Release the tension on that spring. Very careful handling springs because they're exceptionally good at getting away. Just a plain screw at this end. Top plate should lift off. Moving flash contact will lift off. I'll release the action of that mechanism, uncock it in other words, get this lever off. And remove the shutter release lever. I need a pair of needle nose pliers to get hold of that spring so I can unhook that.